My name is Luke Harrison, and I'm an ice climber from Colorado. For as long as I can remember, the mountains have been my sanctuary, a place where I could challenge myself, find peace, and feel alive. I never thought much about life after death. I was too focused on conquering the next peak, too busy chasing that rush of adrenaline. It was a freezing morning when I set out for what I thought would be another unforgettable climb. The ice was sheer, the air was biting, and I felt invincible as I scaled the cliff face. But then, in an instant, everything changed. If you love Jesus as much as we do, be sure to subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss inspiring content like this. Now, let me tell you what happened in my shocking near-death experience that changed my life forever. I remember the moment my ice axe slipped. It was like time itself paused. The piercing cold of the air vanished, replaced by an almost serene stillness. I felt myself falling, but then, strangely, I was no longer tethered to my body. Instead, I was floating above, watching as my lifeless form lay crumpled against the ice-covered rocks below. Everything around me became bathed in a soft golden light. It wasn't blinding, but warm and inviting, like the first rays of dawn after a bitter night. The pain, the fear, it was all gone. In their place, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and love that words can barely describe. As I drifted toward the light, I noticed figures in the distance. They weren't just people. They radiated a brilliance and purity that could only be described as angelic. Then, amidst them, a presence emerged that commanded all attention. It was Jesus. His eyes held a depth of love and understanding that pierced through every doubt and fear. His voice was gentle, yet powerful. "Luke," he said, "you are here for a purpose. There is a message you must carry back to the world." In that moment, I realized my journey was only beginning. As I stood in the presence of Jesus, everything around me began to shift. The warm light of heaven dimmed slightly, and before me unfolded a series of vivid scenes that felt as real as life itself. "Luke," Jesus said, his voice both comforting and resolute, "what I am about to show you is not to frighten you, but to prepare you. The enemy works in ways unseen, subtle, yet devastating." The first scene opened in a bustling city. The streets were filled with people, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of handheld devices and digital screens embedded in everyday objects. At first, it all seemed harmless, people chatting, laughing, and living their lives. But then I noticed something unsettling. Everyone seemed disconnected. Families sat together at dinner tables, but no one spoke. Parents stared at screens while children begged for attention. "This," Jesus said, gesturing to the scene, "is how the enemy begins his work. He distracts, isolates, and weakens the bonds that hold my people together." The scene shifted abruptly, and now I was in a corporate office. Executives in sleek suits discussed the rollout of a new technology, small digital implants placed beneath the skin. They spoke of convenience. No need for wallets, keys, or even phones. Everything, identity, currency, health data, could be accessed with a wave of the hand. The idea was sold as progress, a step toward a seamless future. But then I saw the darker side. In another room, people who resisted the implants were quietly removed from their jobs, labeled as uncooperative or outdated. Churches that spoke against the technology were branded as extremist organizations, their members ostracized and silenced. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Do you see how the enemy works? He cloaks deception in the guise of progress, making it appear necessary and harmless." The vision shifted again. I was in a small, once thriving church. The pews were empty, the air heavy with a sense of abandonment. A pastor stood at the pulpit, pleading with the congregation to remain faithful despite the growing pressures of the world outside. But the congregation had dwindled, many lured away by a culture that prioritized comfort and conformity over faith. I felt a deep ache in my heart. Lord, I asked, how did it come to this? How can people not see what's happening? Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. It happens gradually, my child. The enemy does not come with force, but with subtle deception. He wraps his lies in beauty and convenience, so they appear harmless to the unsuspecting. But those who remain vigilant, who stay close to me, will not be deceived. The vision continued, each scene more heart-wrenching than the last. A family gathered in their living room, divided by arguments over whether to accept the new digital implant. A teenager, ostracized by peers for refusing to conform, sat alone in tears. A church, once filled with worshippers, closed its doors for the last time. With each scene, the weight of the message grew heavier. Jesus explained, "The enemy seeks to break down unity, within families, within churches, and within the hearts of my people. He knows that a divided people are easily overcome." I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was seeing. "Lord," I said, my voice trembling, "how can I possibly warn people about this? I'm just an ordinary person." Jesus looked at me with unwavering love. "You are not alone, Luke. My Spirit will guide you, and my word will strengthen you. Share what you have seen, and trust that I will do the rest." The vision paused, leaving me in a moment of reflection, and I knew this was just the beginning. The vision resumed, and this time I found myself in a massive, high-tech facility. Rows of people sat at terminals, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of holographic screens. Their expressions were blank, almost robotic. On the walls, slogans flashed: "Efficiency is unity. Conformity is progress." "These are the chains of the future," Jesus said, his tone heavy with sorrow. "The enemy offers comfort and convenience, but it comes at the cost of free will and faith." As I watched, I saw how people were subtly manipulated. The implants, initially presented as tools for convenience, had become instruments of control. Every transaction, every movement, every thought was monitored. Those who didn't comply were flagged, their access to resources slowly stripped away. I saw a man standing in line at a grocery store, his implant rejected because he had attended a banned church service. Security escorted him away, and the other customers averted their eyes, too afraid to intervene. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding. "Lord, why do so many accept this? Can't they see the danger?" He replied, "The enemy feeds on fear, and fear blinds the heart. He whispers lies, convincing people that survival requires surrender. But my people must remember, true life is found in me, not in the systems of this world." The scene shifted again, this time to a school. Children sat at desks, but instead of learning about truth and history, they were being indoctrinated with messages that denied faith and elevated the New World Order. I saw a young girl raise her hand to ask a question about God, only to be reprimanded by the teacher. "Faith has no place here," the teacher said coldly. The girl's eyes filled with tears, and I felt a deep ache for the innocence being lost. "This is how it begins," Jesus said. "The enemy targets the hearts of the young, for they are the foundation of the future. But my word is eternal, and it will endure. Teach the children, Luke. Remind them of who I am." Next, I found myself in a grand, opulent hall. World leaders gathered around a massive table, discussing a universal solution to the chaos that had engulfed the world. They spoke of unity, peace, and prosperity, but beneath their words lay an undercurrent of control and domination. I noticed one figure at the head of the table, cloaked in shadow but exuding an unsettling charisma. The leaders seemed almost mesmerized by him, nodding in agreement with every word. "This," Jesus said, "is the face of the great deception. He will rise with promises of salvation, but his true intent is destruction." I felt a chill run through me as the vision zoomed in on this figure. His smile was disarming, his words eloquent, but his eyes betrayed a darkness that sent shivers down my spine. "Lord, is there no hope?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jesus turned to me, his presence radiating love and strength. There is always hope, Luke. The enemy's power is temporary, but my kingdom is eternal. Those who hold fast to my truth will overcome. The vision then showed moments of resistance, small groups of believers gathering in secret to worship and study the Word. They were not large in number, but their faith was unshakable. I saw a woman sharing her last piece of bread with a stranger, a man risking his life to smuggle Bibles, and a child praying boldly despite the threats around her. "These are my warriors," Jesus said with pride in his voice. "They do not fight with weapons, but with faith, love, and the truth of my word. They are the light in the darkness." Finally, the vision culminated in a powerful scene. A massive storm loomed over the earth, and the forces of evil seemed to dominate every corner. But then, a brilliant light pierced through the darkness. It was the Word of God, carried by those who had remained faithful. As the light spread, the darkness began to retreat, and the chains that bound people were shattered. Jesus turned to me one last time, his eyes filled with both urgency and compassion. "Luke, the battle is not over, but the victory is already mine. Go back and tell my people to stand firm, to love one another, and to trust in me. The enemy's lies may be great, but my truth is greater." With those words, the vision began to fade, leaving me with a sense of awe and responsibility. I knew I had been shown these things for a reason, and I felt the weight of the task ahead. This was no longer just my story. It was a message for all who would listen. The vision shifted once again, plunging me into a series of heart-wrenching scenes that laid bare the devastating consequences of societal deception. I stood in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the streets were eerily silent. The once vibrant houses, adorned with signs of life and love, now stood cold and lifeless. Inside one home, I saw a family divided. A father sat at the dining table, his face etched with anger, while his teenage son stared at him in defiance. The argument between them was not about the usual struggles of family life, but about faith. "You have to stop going to that church," the father said, slamming his fist on the table. "It's putting us all at risk. If they find out, we'll lose everything. Our jobs, our home, our safety." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but his resolve didn't waver. "I can't deny Jesus, Dad. I won't." The father turned away, his face filled with a mix of fear and shame. The mother stood frozen, torn between her husband and her son. It was a scene of heartbreak, a family torn apart by the fear of man and the courage of faith. Jesus stood beside me, his voice heavy with sorrow. This is what the enemy seeks to do, divide and conquer. He sows fear to weaken the bonds of love and faith, leaving people isolated and vulnerable. The vision shifted again, this time to a bustling city square. People lined up in silence, their expressions blank and lifeless, waiting for their turn to be scanned by a towering machine. Each scan determined their worth, their access to resources, their ability to live freely. Those who resisted were quietly led away, their fate unknown but unmistakably grim. Among the crowd, I saw a woman clutching her young child. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Stay quiet, baby. We'll get through this." But her fear betrayed her words, and the child's wide eyes mirrored her terror. "Lord," I said, my voice breaking, "how can they live like this? How can anyone endure such fear and oppression?" Jesus turned to me, his gaze unwavering. "Fear is the enemy's greatest weapon, but my perfect love casts out fear. Those who cling to me will find the strength to endure, even in the darkest times." The next scene struck me to my core. I was taken to a church, once a sanctuary of hope, now a hollow shell. The pews were gone, replaced by cold metallic rows of chairs. The cross that had once adorned the altar was replaced by a generic symbol of unity, stripped of its meaning. A man stood at the front, addressing the sparse congregation. "Faith must adapt to the times," he said, his voice devoid of passion. "We must embrace progress and set aside old beliefs that divide us. The people listened in silence, their faces expressionless. The fire of their faith had been extinguished, replaced by a numb acceptance of the world's demands. I felt a tear slip down my cheek. Lord, how can your people lose their way like this? Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, his voice filled with both sadness and hope. When the truth is compromised, the heart grows cold. But even now, I am calling my children back to me. There is still hope. In the final scene of this part of the vision, I was taken to a desolate landscape, a symbol of societal collapse. Buildings lay in ruins, and the air was heavy with despair. Groups of people wandered aimlessly, their eyes hollow, and their spirits broken. Amid the devastation, I saw a small group of believers huddled together. They were weak, their clothes tattered, but their faith shone brightly. One woman held a tattered Bible, her hands trembling as she read aloud, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" The group echoed her words, their voices filled with both defiance and hope. Jesus turned to me, his eyes blazing with love and authority. "This is the remnant, Luke. No matter how dark the world becomes, there will always be those who stand firm in my truth. They are the light that will pierce the darkness." I felt a surge of both heartbreak and hope. The devastation was overwhelming, but the resilience of the faithful reminded me that the battle was not lost. As the vision continued, I was taken deeper into the heart of the devastation. This time, I found myself in a vast wasteland. The land was barren, the air thick with a suffocating stillness. It was as if the very soul of humanity had been drained. In the distance, I saw people walking aimlessly, their faces marked by despair. Then, out of the haze, I saw a family, parents and 2 children, huddled together near the remnants of what looked like a small fire. The father, though gaunt and weak, held his children close, whispering words of comfort. "We may have lost everything," he said, "but we will never lose our faith." His wife nodded, clutching a small worn cross in her hand. "Do you see, Luke?" Jesus said, his voice filled with both sorrow and hope. "Even in the midst of ruin, there are those who hold fast to me. Their faith is their shield, their anchor in the storm." The scene shifted again. I was now in a massive, sterile facility where rows of people were hooked up to machines. Their eyes were closed and their expressions vacant. Screens above their heads displayed images of idyllic lives, beautiful homes, successful careers, perfect families. But the reality was starkly different. These people were trapped, living in a manufactured illusion while their bodies were controlled by the system. "This is the enemy's ultimate goal," Jesus explained. "To strip humanity of its free will, to create a world where people are enslaved by lies and distractions, unable to seek the truth." I felt a wave of anger rise within me. Lord, how can this be allowed to happen? Why don't more people see the truth? Jesus turned to me, his gaze steady and full of love. "Many choose comfort over truth, Luke. The enemy makes his path seem easy, but it leads to destruction. My path is narrow, and it requires sacrifice, but it leads to life, eternal." The vision then took me to a massive gathering of people. They were all facing a towering figure, a man whose presence was both magnetic and menacing. He spoke with eloquence, promising peace, prosperity, and unity. The crowd cheered, hanging on his every word, but I could feel the darkness emanating from him. "This is the culmination of the enemy's plan," Jesus said, his voice firm. "He will deceive many, appearing as a savior while leading them further into bondage. But remember, his power is temporary. My victory is eternal." As I watched, a small group of people stepped away from the crowd. They were hesitant, their movements uncertain, but their faces showed a spark of recognition, a glimmer of understanding. They turned away from the false leader and began walking toward a distant light. Jesus smiled, his expression filled with pride. These are my sheep, Luke. They hear my voice, even in the midst of deception. They are the reason you must share this message. The vision shifted once more, and I found myself in a place that felt both familiar and otherworldly. It was a crossroads, where people were making choices that would define their eternal destinies. Some walked confidently toward the light, their faces filled with peace. Others hesitated, torn between the allure of the world and the call of something greater. One man stood at the crossroads, tears streaming down his face. "Lord, I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I've made so many mistakes." Jesus stepped forward, his presence radiating compassion. "Come to me," he said gently. "My grace is sufficient for you. Your past does not define you. Your choice does." The man fell to his knees, and as he surrendered, his face transformed. The weight of guilt and shame lifted, replaced by joy and freedom. I turned to Jesus, overwhelmed by the power of what I had witnessed. "Lord, how can I make people understand this? How can I help them see what truly matters?" Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, his eyes filled with love and reassurance. "Luke, you are not alone. My Spirit will guide you, and my word will give you strength. Share what you have seen, and trust that those with open hearts will hear." The final scene of the vision was one of breathtaking beauty. I saw a glimpse of the new heaven and the new earth, a world restored to its intended glory. Families were reunited, laughter filled the air, and the light of God's presence shone everywhere. "This is what awaits those who remain faithful," Jesus said. "The enemy's plans may bring destruction, but my promises bring life. Tell my people to hold on, for the day of redemption is near." As the vision began to fade, I felt a deep sense of both urgency and hope. The weight of the message was heavy, but I knew that the love and truth I had experienced would carry me forward. When I finally returned to the presence of Jesus, he looked at me with a seriousness that cut through to my soul. "Go back, Luke. Share what you have seen. The time is short, but my grace is sufficient for all who turn to me. Be bold, for I am with you always." With those words, I knew my mission was clear. The vision may have ended, but its impact would stay with me forever. The transition back to the physical world was sudden and jarring. One moment, I was standing in the radiant presence of Jesus, surrounded by the visions of eternity. The next, I was gasping for air, pain searing through my body as I lay at the base of the ice-covered cliff. The cold bit at my skin, but it was nothing compared to the overwhelming flood of emotions and memories from what I had just witnessed. As my senses returned, I realized I was alive, bruised, broken, but alive. I looked around, the stark, frozen landscape a sharp contrast to the heavenly warmth I had experienced. Tears streamed down my face, a mix of gratitude and sorrow. I knew I had been sent back for a reason, but the weight of what I had seen was almost too much to bear. Even as my body ached, my soul felt renewed, charged with a purpose far greater than myself. The message I had been entrusted with burned in my heart like a fire that could not be quenched. As I lay there, waiting for rescue, I reflected on the call to action Jesus had given me. His words echoed in my mind, clear and undeniable. "Luke, the time is short. Tell my people to prepare their hearts. Strengthen their faith, for the days ahead will test their resolve. Encourage them to seek my word, for it is the foundation of truth. Teach them to love one another, for unity in me will be their strength. And remind them that no matter how dark the world may seem, I have already overcome it." I knew that sharing this message would not be easy. The visions I had seen, the deception, the division, the spiritual battles, were not just warnings. They were a call for action, a plea for humanity to turn back to God. As I was eventually found and brought to safety, the reality of my experience began to settle in. Friends and family were eager to know what had happened, and at first I struggled to find the words. How could I possibly convey the magnitude of what I had witnessed? But the more I spoke, the more the words flowed, as if guided by a force beyond myself. Do you believe in miracles? I found myself asking people, because I've seen one. And it's not just about surviving a fall, it's about what comes after this life. It's about the choices we make and the eternity that awaits. To you watching this, I want to ask the same question. Do you believe in miracles? Do you believe that there's more to life than what we see? Because I promise you, there is. If there's one thing I learned from my near-death experience, it's that we are living in a time of great spiritual warfare. The enemy is working harder than ever to deceive, to divide, and to destroy. But the good news, the best news, is that we don't have to face it alone. Jesus is with us, offering hope, guidance, and victory. What he showed me that I want to share with you. Dive into God's Word. The Bible is not just a book, it's a living, breathing guide that will anchor you in truth. Study it, meditate on it, and let it shape your heart and mind. Surround yourself with fellow believers who will encourage and support you. Together, you can stand strong against the challenges of the world. The greatest weapon we have against the enemy is love. Love your family, your neighbors, and even those who oppose you. Love breaks down barriers and brings light to the darkest places. Deception doesn't always come in obvious forms. Pray for discernment and be wary of anything that draws you away from God's truth. Just as I have been called to share my story, you too are called to share the hope and truth of Jesus with others. Your testimony, no matter how small it may seem, has the power to change lives. As I close this message, I want to leave you with a reassurance that brought me great peace. No matter how overwhelming the challenges of life may seem, God is greater. His love is stronger than any force of darkness, and His promises are eternal. If you're watching this and you feel a tug at your heart, don't ignore it. That's Jesus calling you, inviting you into a relationship with Him. Open your heart, pray, and seek Him with all that you are. He will meet you where you are, just as He met me. Remember, faithful believers will overcome, not by their own strength, but by the power of God's grace and love. You are not alone in this journey. If you haven't already, I encourage you to strengthen your walk with Christ today. And if this story has touched your heart, please share it with others. Let's spread the light of His truth together. Now, as I reflect on my return to life, I know this is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a mission to live boldly for Christ, to love without fear, and to share the message that was entrusted to me. You are loved, you are chosen, and you are called. Let's walk this journey of faith together, trusting in the one who has already overcome. This is my testimony, and I share it with all my heart. God bless you.